Hi, hello, I'm MRMA here. Today I'd like to talk to you about something that interests me once again. So, when we talk about history, oftentimes people will think of this subject in which you have to memorize all the dates, all the names, all the whipsy whoopsie 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 of the times gone by. So, let's say, uh, Philippine independence, June 12th, 1896, and then 1898, Philippine Revolution, and then stuff like that. Uh, those things they tend to be quite you know damaging to the image of what history is supposed to be. You see, for me, okay, for someone like me who likes history, history is a bunch of stories of the past. It has a lot of lessons that we can use to guide our present into a brighter future. So, essentially, I like history so much because it's like listening to a book or listening to or watching a series rather, because you tend to put yourself into a time that has already passed, a time that's no longer familiar to you right now, a time that was way back when you were born, and essentially you try to relive the specific events that take place. So an example of that would be the Philippine Revolution or the Revolutionary War against Spain, which ended up being a failure because we ended up getting, conquered by America. But I digress. Sige lang. So that it seems boring to a lot of people because the only thing they really remember are okay, the names, the dates, the like this, like that, like that, like this. And in fact, you could really see it as okay, so in this particular day this story happened. And when you learn about that story, you want to learn more about the whole event. So you learn, okay, after that story, this happened, this battle of like this, like that. And then, God, the betrayal of this and that, the death of like this, like that. It's like listening to a series, man. So I personally started liking history because I wanted to make a sort of series, a project series that sort of tried to promote at least world history because it was my thing back then. Other people would talk about academics, other people would talk about girlfriend Joa. Me, I would talk about history, man. God, Project Babylon, man. French Revolution, man. Stuff like that. But you know I wanted to try and imagine myself in those situations. And my way of doing so would be through drawing. Since I've mentioned before that I'm an artist, or at least an artist in my own right, I would tend to draw myself, being in historical situations, like, let's say, the sinking of Titanic. Whoa! Oh my god! Stuff like that. But nothing really struck my interest until I arrived at Philippine history, specifically Zamboangueño history, Zamboanga's history. Not Zamboangueño history, but Zamboanga history. So, you see, a lot of people will tend to dismiss Zamboanga City because it's just another city with a fort. But in reality, if you try to look at it, it's pretty much a city with a very rich history. See, you've got it's pretty much the center of the conflict between the Spanish and the Moros. You see, we have the Fort Pilar, which was established as a stronghold against the Moros, who were constantly attacking the settlements way in the north, back in Visayas, essentially. So, see, there on that particular space alone, in the Fort Pilar itself alone, it already has a very rich history. Now, that's not to exclude all the others. You see, mismong the town hall, city hall. Our city hall used to be the provincial capital building, or at the capital building. And that capital building, that provincial building, was the main capital building of the Moro province, which existed back in 1904 to 1913, as far as I can remember. So, it's those historical facts that sort of tickle my fancy, so to speak. and makes me think that, there's something special about the city. There's something special about the whole other stuff because there's a lot of stories to be told. See, in World War II, Zamboanga was pretty much one of the last cities to be conquered by Spain. No, by Japan. If I can remember, it said around January 1942, something like that. Whereas others fell way before that. So essentially, history has become a very, very nice topic for me because yun na nga, history is stories. A lot of stories that I could listen to, I could be interested in. I would look at, pictures of old times and go, "Oi, I recognize this era. In this era, this happened. It was this stuff and that stuff happened." See, now I bring this up. I talk about history in this particular video because yun na nga, a lot of people tend to dismiss it as just another subject. When in fact, it should not be dismissed as another subject. It should be, something that a lot of us inherently know, or not inherently know. It is something that we should all strive to at least have knowledge in. Because what tends to happen is that if we forget about history, it tends to repeat. And we all know that a lot of bad things in history have already happened that are currently happening right now. I will not go into political stuff, nor will I go into specifics, but let's just say that the times of the Spanish, the injustices, all the bad stuff, the treatment towards the poor, the injustice given towards a certain group, all that other stuff is happening right now. The only thing that's different is that we don't have a colonizer to pit our forces against, okay? We only have ourselves, and we're pretty much attacking ourselves, So, how is it possible that the times of before is pretty much existing in the times of right now? You see? Well, it happens because people tend to forget about history. People tend to dismiss the facts. Okay, those happen, and so what? Because they dismiss those facts, they tend to not learn anything from it, and because they tend to not learn anything from it, the things that happen or the things that would lead towards those injustices will no longer be recognized and instead be welcomed because it seems like it has a good benefit, and before you know it, we're back in square one. See, that's the most unfortunate part about our country, is that we tend to not value history at all. Okay, so a big thing about those who do value history is that sometimes they tend to abuse, the historical facts. So, okay, I'll get a bit political right now, but I'm gonna point this out. So, here in Zamboanga City, so we had a siege back in 2013. Okay, back in 2013, that was against the AFP and the MNLF, a rogue faction of the MNLF. And so what ended up happening was that the city was sort of ravaged because of a quote-unquote misunderstanding. Okay, so the Moros, or at least the MNLF tried to come here in Zamboanga with peaceful intentions, apparently. And then the AFP mistook it with something else, and then they mistook it with something else. Yada, 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 yada. Siege. Boom, 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 boom. Families got displaced, and all that other stuff. So, essentially, it was a terrible, terrible time for our city. But, if you try to look at the justifications of it, some of them would tend to turn back to, the times of old. Back in the days when the Moro province existed. Because you see, the Moro province was composed of Zamboanga City, the Sulu Islands, and the other parts of Mindanao. See, if I could remember properly, it's Tawi-Tawi, Sulu, Basilan, Zamboanga, Lanao, Maguindanao, and Cotabato. Essentially, those were the places that were under the Moro province at the time. Moro province of 1904 to 1913. And Department of Mindanao from 1913 to some other time until Zamboanga City became a city itself. So it is because of that romanticization, because of that, that idea of a Moro province existing, that these people thought that Zamboanga City is a Moro city, when in fact it is not, okay? Historically, it may have been the capital of the Moro province, and therefore the capital of the Moro territory, but it's not, okay? It's really not. Because if you look at the demographics, uh, 2 out of 3 Zamboangueños are Christian, okay? Doon pa lang, you can already pretty much understand that it's not a Moro city, okay? Because there are more Christians who have lived in their more established territories, in their more established barangays, than Muslims. It's true na back in the 12th century, it used to be with the Subanans, and then the 14th century, they became the territory of the Moros, and then the 15th century, wars happened, and all other stuff. But that does not mean that Zamboanga City is a Moro city, nor is it entitled to become a Moro capital. Unfortunately, a lot of Moro nationalists don't tend to understand that. They tend to go back to history and say, you see, you're forgetting the history of our people. Well, they may be. It's possible that you're forgetting the history of the people, but you're also neglecting the history of what came after the fact. Okay? You're also neglecting the years that Zamboanga had to essentially form itself into the city that it is right now. So it is because of those things, it is because of those people who tend to abuse the idea of a historical past or history in general. It is because of those who try to abuse history that we absolutely have to learn about history ourselves. Okay? We have to learn about the things that happened before, way back then, in order for us to know what to do right now, because they are chock full of lessons, okay? And unfortunately, yun na nga, no one really likes to talk about history. No one likes to think of it as a valid subject, and no one likes to think of it as a cool and historical thingy wingy. So it's up to us, the people who actually like history and see the value in history, to try and essentially promote it to the people. See, I personally have been planning to establish a sort of history of Zamboanga City, something like that, a video series of essays and stuff like that. Well, it's just a plan lang naman. I don't have any solid things to say naman din at the moment, but maybe in the future I might. So sige, yun lang. And I have also been, meaning to join a lot of the Zamboanga history stuff, the Zamba Sulta history, a lot of other stuff. But unfortunately, it's either 3 things, okay? Number 1 is that they tend to be very inactive. See, like, people will only go there to post pictures, then wala na, all that other stuff has been just, thrown out the drain because, a picture's good enough. See, yun yung first, inactive sila. Second is that they tend to have these rules. Let's say, okay, for you to be in this part, you must speak in Chavacano only, because Chavacano is a dying dialect. It's a dying language, and therefore we must preserve it. For you to be a history buff, you must preserve the living history that we have, which is Chavacano, stuff like that. See, I agree with that, but the problem is I am not proficient in Chavacano, okay? I can understand it when people say it, when people type it down. I can understand it, but I cannot speak it, okay? My tongue, for some odd reason, cannot the words, I think you understand them, din. So, yun na. Inactive, rules that I cannot follow, and third is some of them, admittedly, are against Moros. And as a young Moro man, I understand why. Because, historically, Zamboanga City has always been raided by the likes of the Sultanate of Maguindanao and the Sultanate of Sulu. They have always been raided. When the Spanish went outside, When they went to Manila, essentially leaving the Zamboangueños behind, they raided, and then, you know, years later, the hatred towards the Moro warriors who would raid you became stronger until 1876, when there was a treaty between Spain and the Sultanate of Sulu, which essentially made, Jolo a sort of a walled capital. No. A settlement of the Spanish, in which they transferred their capital to Maimbong, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. So, see, I also cannot blame them because those things are true. Those are rooted in history, and it also does not help the fact that in 2013 the city was besieged by Moros. By rogue Moros, so to speak, because you see, absolutely every single Muslim Moro person that I've met since that time absolutely denounces what happened. They absolutely say, no, that's bad, that's what represent us. And that's pretty much true for all of us naman din. So, yun, I understand why they would dislike the Moros. I understand why they would hate, they would hate the idea of a Moro essentially going, yeah, history. Because yun na nga, the injustice, the perceived injustice is happening. But, it's also weird because in a way, we're both being injusticed, Historically, it was the Christians, or the Filipinos rather, who were being attacked and raided by the sultanates of Sulu and Maguindanao. Maranao rather. Maranao. Whatever sila. Attack. And then they become fed up with it until na nag-form yung other party, which is yung the stronger Filipinos who became more technologically advanced, all the other things, more politically, influential. And then it ended up na kami, Moros, were the ones who became discriminated upon. See, 1946, we did not want to be part of the Philippines, essentially the Republic of the Philippines. We did not want to be part of that. We wanted to be part of America, still under America. But because America was like, yeah, you know what? Philippine Islands, yeah, sure, Philippines. Okay, you're in the Philippines now. So yun, because of the presidents who would do the Land Reform Act, which would unfortunately displace a lot of the Moros from their land, it led to the discrimination against the Moro people themselves as a second-class people, like this, like that, like this. And then it essentially reached a point where we had to essentially fight for our rights, Marcos, being the guy that he is, was like, you know what, Sabah is Philippines because of Sulu, right? Yeah. So Moros, yes, Moros, Moros, you attack, you see. And unfortunately, that did not go well. It really did not go well. And whether it's historically accurate or not is still up for debate for a lot of people. But I personally believe na Jabida Massacre actually happened. So ayun, it is because of those historical things that it's kind of weird for me. I am unfortunately saddened by them disliking the Moros, but I also understand why. Okay, it also does not help how other Moros tend to see it as ammunition towards their anger instead of seeing it as a starting point towards healing. That's the unfortunate part, and it's because people don't like to learn about history. And if they want to learn about history, they only want to learn about the nitpicks that benefit them at that moment in time. Yun lang. That's all there is to it. A very unstructured, a very, what do you call this? A very random type of talk right now, a very random type of rant. I know it's very incoherent, but I hope you understand my idea. Okay? I like history. It's one of my favorite subjects, given for as long as it is being taught in a way na, it piques my interest. And I believe na the Philippines has to invest in the promotion of its history, because without our history, we will forget the lessons of the past, and essentially repeat the mistakes in our present, which would harm our future. And we don't want that now, do we? So, yun lang. Okay, bye-bye.